a very interesting experience for me when I watched it for the first time, and I was really taken aback. I had no idea that we had this kind of cinema outside the scope of Bollywood, outside the scope of Hollywood. There was this foreign language cinema which had such amazing, cinematic qualities. I loved the cinematography. I loved the performances. I loved the direction. I thought the screenplay was wonderful. I thought the background music was wonderful. So I think photographs, newspaper clippings, newspaper and archive plays a very important role. And I'm sure, Florian Henkel and his team, they really, took it upon themselves to get the detailing right. And that is probably the reason why the film did so well at the festivals. And later on, it also ended up winning the Foreign Picture Oscar. And you have to understand that we are still many years away from Parasite's triumph.
Hello, Murtaza ji. Welcome back to my podcast, which is called Spoiler Alert with me, Cinephile Sanket. So, Murtaza ji, we are discussing this time another Berlin-based film, Berlin set film, which is called The Lives of Others, which is directed and written by Florian Heinkel von Donnersmarck. The other Berlin set film we discussed in the previous podcast of mine, which was called The Bridge of Spies, which was like the Steven Spielberg film. So like it's exciting to like discuss another Berlin set film, Cold War era set film. So yeah, welcome back to my channel, Murtaza. So like, can you tell me when did you watch this film for the first time ever, and like what was your experience like when you watched this film for the first time, and compared to when you rewatched this film, since I know that you introduced this film in the Berlin Film Festival, which happened in New Delhi. When you introduced this film and when you rewatched this film, what was the experience like?
First and foremost, let me tell you, Sanket, it's great to be back on your show. And coincidentally, it's another Berlin film that we are discussing, and that too a film which is set during the Cold War days. So that's really a deja vu of sorts. And it's really exciting to be back on your show. So thank you so much. Coming to your question, I think this is something that goes back to my graduation days. These were the times when I was slowly getting introduced to world cinema, because being an Indian, you grow up watching Bollywood, and then you occasionally also watch a lot of Hollywood films. Sometimes the new ones which hit the theaters during summers, or sometimes the Hindi dub versions that show up on various channels. So this was something new for me when I got introduced to world cinema, and I was told that if you are particularly interested in the Cold War days, because we have always seen those spy thrillers, and Cold War was a period which often is associated with spy genre, with surveillance, and with a lot of espionage related stuff.
I think
So
James Bond
that's
played
when
a
I got,
main role, right?
of course, James Bond, and later on, there were other writers as well, like John Le Carre.
John Le Carre,
So
yeah.
that was something that we all grew up reading and watching, and then there were our Indian versions of Spies as well. So, like, I remember watching this television series called Tehqiqat on Doordarshan with Vijay Anand. That used to be something, and there was Vyomkesh Bakshi on Doordarshan back in the 90s. So all that is something that we have grown up watching. So when I was introduced to this new kind of international cinema, I was really enthralled to know that there's this film called The Lives of Others, and this was around 2005, 2006 when I was slowly, developing an appetite for it. And by the time this film came out, I missed watching it in theaters. I remember, because back in the day there used to be very limited releases for international films, that too non-English ones. So when finally I got an opportunity to watch it in probably 2007 or 8, I was told that it's best to watch it with this, comparative piece called Goodbye Lenin. Now, Goodbye Lenin is also set in similar times, but it's a film that's morely, more to do with the comedy aspects of life in Berlin, life in East Berlin, particularly during the Cold War days. So this was a very interesting comparative piece. So you usually watch these films back to back. and then you are able to get a very interesting insight and also two very different treatments. Here is a spy thriller, which espionage, and there's this film which is about comedy, a family drama. But when you watch it one after the other, you can either watch, Lives of Others first, and then you can follow it up with Goodbye Lenin, or vice versa. You get a very good idea about how the life was, in those days, and how tough it would have been for people. And you also get an idea, if you watch Life of Others first, then you get to know, okay, this was how it was before the wall fell. And then Goodbye Lenin gives you a very good idea about how the life slowly started changing with the East and West uniting. So that's a very interesting experience for me when I watched it for the first time, and I was really taken aback. I had no idea that we had this kind of cinema outside the scope of Bollywood, outside the scope of Hollywood. There was this foreign language cinema which had such amazing, cinematic qualities. I loved the cinematography. I loved the performances. I loved the direction. I thought the screenplay was wonderful. I thought the background music was wonderful. So I was really transported to this entire different world altogether. And after watching it, for the first time, I've revisited it a few times, over the last decade or so. But while I introduced this film at the India Habitat Center as part of the Berlin Film Festival, which I had also curated with the Embassy of Germany, it was a different feeling altogether. First, there was a sense of nostalgia because, while preparing, I was also going through certain sequences from the film, and they're very powerful sequences. Some of these sequences made me very emotional. Some of them made me a little uneasy, and then I could relate to the pain and sufferings of these characters. So that was something that I felt very strongly this time around. And since I was watching it on the big screen this time, I could see a sense of amplification of everything. Everything got amplified: the emotions, the drama, the suspense, how Stasi would subject its citizens to all kinds of surveillance. And in a world where we are also getting to hear about things like Pegasus, I thought that this is not just a history capsule. This is actually something that is probably relevant even today, as we have seen with governments all across the world subjecting their citizens to surveillance. So this was something when we saw the worst of it. So in a way, it's an eye opener also, and the film is not just a historical piece. It's also something which somewhat prepares us for the worst. And this was really the worst phase in humanity. And in Berlin, I think this idea of Cold War, this idea of division, this idea of the world being divided into these two spheres, I think Berlin was really the epicenter of this. It existed in its actual essence. That wall was actually symbolic of how the world is divided into these two political or ideological spheres. So that the very idea itself is very creepy. But when you see a film like Lives of Others on the big screen, it really hits you. And it hit me like it has never done in the past. And that's what I think made this screening more special.
Wow, actually, I like developed the taste of world cinema in 2018, and this was one of those first films I watched as a world cinema viewer. And I was shocked by it because, like, as I mentioned, that James Bond and all those films were actually, obviously, they were there before I watched The Lives of Others. But like, this was a very different perspective of the world cinema, because like, this was a local perspective I got, uh, because I have watched The Bridge of Spies back in 2017, I think. Like, I know because I watched that film before The Lives of Others, and it was more of a Western perspective, like, or like, it was given by Steven Spielberg. But here, actually, he gave an inside look of how like what goes on in a life, or in a life of a Berlin artist, and like how he is being censored, and like his colleagues are being tapped, and like he also is being tapped by the government over there, like and also the funny thing is, like, in the starting itself, it like we can like see that the year which is set in, it's 1984. And like, I don't know, but like he the director actually paid an homage to the George Orwell, which like George Orwell wrote the novel called 1984, like which actually kind of predicted those all those dictatorships and like the Big Brother watching all those stuff. So I actually thought like, oh wow, like it's something strange, like the year is strange, but actually I researched about it. Like I actually got to know from this from an interview from actually a director's commentary. I just like heard some few minutes about of the director's commentary, and he told that no, it's like I didn't give any homage to Orwell. Actually, the like 1984 were a very like important year for Germany, like for East Germany as well, like because
Yes.
like many things were
Yes.
happening over there. So that's the main reason I
And
said this one.
85, with the coming of Mikhail Gorbachev, glasnost was introduced, so the government became more transparent, at least on paper. But this was
Exactly.
actually the year when you saw the worst of it. It's really
Exactly. That's the
dark
reason like
times.
we actually get to know from in the film itself that like the lead character, the Stasi officer, has a newspaper as well on like on the other side, on the next seat of the car, that Mikhail Gorbachev has been elected as the like the dictator of the Soviet Union. So yeah, like I was just shocked by it, like wow, such a brilliant film about surveillance like this is. And I've also watched somewhat like like I don't know it's related to surveillance, but like the Truman Show, I've watched that film, and like kind of somewhat related to this film, like all those people spying on you and like completely watching
That
you
idea of Big
constantly.
Brother or somebody who's up there constantly watching your movements.
Exactly. So like this was like I was so shocked by watching it. Like when I watched it initially, I didn't knew about like those aspects with like how was the acting or the music or the direction. But like this time when I rewatched this film for just before recording this podcast, I was absolutely shocked by the lead actor like acting in this film. Like uh he just gave the
Ulrich Moe.
Ulrich Muhe, like he just gave the perfect expression whenever needed. Like he was perfect when he was interrogating the first like the traitor, and like he was just on
Wow,
point.
what a scene.
Exactly, the
He
opening
even
scene.
has the sweat sample for the dogs. That is so creepy. It
Exactly.
really gave me nightmares. The very thought of,
Exactly.
that interrogation. Oh my God.
Exactly, like I was also like like something like what heights can the dictators can like go, and those like secret police can go. I was so shocked about that. And then later his heart was like kind of going to the right direction. His heart was changing, and like he gave the necessary emotions over there. Like he was actually crying, we can see that. And I was so like impressed by his performance. I was like wow, such a award winning performance he gave. And even the music actually played a very good role for me, at least for me. Like the haunting music, like it was completely present in the entire film, I think. So that's the main the reason I actually like this film so
And the
much.
film has a musical origin, the idea of
Hmm.
Lennon listening to this piece of music and wondering
Yeah.
that, could you really be bad if you have listened to the music, with all your heart and with all your, true sense. So this idea, I think, that's where it, emerges from. And so the music is very, very inherent to the narrative.
Hmm. But so actually, I watched like this film when I watched this film, I just loved the cinematography of the film. Like whenever like it was very darkly lit and all those stuff. Like like it was present. So, what do you think about the cinematography of this film, sir?
Kudos to the cinematographer Hagen Bogdansky. I think Bogdansky has done a wonderful job. Sanket, the thing with period films is that getting the period detail is always a challenge. So you have to, evoke that period, and it's always a challenge because you have to interpret it,
Hmm.
based on your own understanding. How do you evoke those periods, those times? You could probably watch some films that came out from that time. Probably even better is to watch photographs. You talk to people who lived through those times. So I think photographs, newspaper clippings, newspaper and archive plays a very important role. And I'm sure, Florian Henkel and his team, they really, took it upon themselves to get the detailing right. And that is probably the reason why the film did so well at the festivals, and later on it also ended up winning the foreign picture Oscar. And you have to understand that we are still many years away from Parasite's triumph. So that was still early years, and foreign language films, didn't have that kind of say when it comes to winning Oscars. Yes, there was this one category, but it was fairly limited, in how a foreign language film could perform at the Oscars. So I'm sure had this film come now, probably after Parasite, I won't be surprised if it would have, won at least 3 to 4 Oscars. I
True that.
can easily imagine, the cinematographer getting an Oscar for his work. I can easily imagine the director probably getting an Oscar for his work, and probably even Ulrich maybe winning the best actor Oscar. I wouldn't be surprised at all had this movie come out today.
Absolutely, sir.
So
Like,
cinematography is really, 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 it's right up there. And you beautifully touched upon Bridge of Spies. I think Bridge of Spies is another film which cinematography plays a very important role, but that is more of a film from an outsider's perspective. Somebody who is an American and he's coming to, East Berlin, and he has some work and he wants to escape. But this is more about people living there and, going through the grind day in and day out. See, you have to understand that when the regime is so trying to suppress its citizens, so even those who are true patriots, even those who are loyal to the regime, even they are pushed against the wall. So you are basically creating traitors, you are creating enemies out of, citizens who want to contribute to the society. These artists, all of them, they actually believed in the idea of socialism to begin with, and that's why they were on the east side. Otherwise, they are so big, their work is so influential, they could have easily gone and settled in the west, but they chose to be
choose
in
to.
the east because they believed in ideals of socialism. They believed in probably Karl Marx or what Lenin was trying to do. But unfortunately, this goes so awry, it becomes so bad that ultimately these people, they wanted to break free, and that's what broke down the empire, or so to say, the entire East Berlin. It's not an outside force. Yes, America was playing a role, but if it wouldn't have been for the unhappiness, if it wouldn't have been for the suicide rates, I am sure, it wouldn't have collapsed the way it did. The entire, East Berlin and the Soviet regime, everything. So it was more to do with the citizens, being suppressed and being subjected to all these atrocities that really triggered its collapse. So I think this is a great case study for all of us to understand probably what is happening in some of the countries around the globe. We have seen where citizens are subjected to constant surveillance, and that is the reason why those countries are not able to probably compete with, say, some of the superpowers in the world. If you look at the countries which are free, fair, where there is freedom of speech, where there is freedom of expression, those countries are doing much better than the countries where the freedom is, not available. So
Suppressed.
this is something for us. Yes, this is something for us to understand. It's a case study to analyze, and I think this is a great film for the posterity to see how and why a regime like this collapsed,
Mm-hmm.
even though the ideals were so noble to begin with. The idea of equality, the idea of, the state wherein everybody will live a prosperous life. But when it comes to, implementation, they failed miserably, and it became this dystopian world. And I think Orwell had predicted it so many years in advance.
Exactly. Like, I was actually, whenever I was watching this film, I actually thought like, oh wow, I've read this novel, 1984, just recently, like a few months back itself. So I was like, oh wow, like Orwell has predicted the thing right. Like it should be like his like great prediction where like the big brothers are actually watching it, like they were bugging it, like and it was so scary about it, like all those things. That's the
I would just
main part
like
of
to
the
add a little
film.
bit about the Stasi, want to give you these facts. So you have to understand these are 100,000 people, so 1 lakh people employed by the Stasi, constantly, involved in surveillance. They're constantly listening to the citizens. They're
Mm.
constantly watching the citizens. And that's not just 1 lakh people, that's also 20 more thousand informers. So it's a network of 1 lakh 20,000 people who have nothing to do in their life, who have no business but to know what your business is. So that's what their business, to interfere with your business. And day in and day out, they are constantly, listening to you. They're constantly watching you, and they want to watch everything. They want to listen to everything. They want to, uh, put you against the wall. They want to completely divide you of the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of creativity. And you have to understand that the suicide rate was so high, probably after Hungary, as it's said in the
Mhm.
film, though the
Mhm.
figures are fabricated. Probably GDR or DDR, as it's called, the Eastern Germany, had the highest suicide rate in the world. And why were people committing suicide? Because of the atrocities that Stasi was subjecting them to on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely, sir. That's the main reason. Like I think, it was like there was a fall of the USSR in the the late 80s and the early 90s, and that's might be the main reason actually. But actually, I actually wanted to ask you, since you are an admirer of those films about surveillance, what other films did you like about surveillance, and how did this film actually take inspiration from all those films? Can you mention those films? And yeah.
See, anybody, if you ask them about surveillance, they would invariably mention the Conversation, which is, a very important film Francis Ford Coppola made with Gene Hackman, and it won the Palme d'Or. And it's a very wonderful film about the idea of surveillance and the paranoia that's associated with surveillance. So, whenever I think of surveillance, whenever I think of snooping, that's the first film that comes to my mind. And if you compare the lives of others to, the Conversation, there are similarities. And I won't be surprised if Florian Henkel actually watched and made his, team, cast, and, crew watch surveillance used, how it is used in the Conversation. Because you
Mhm.
have to understand, if let me take you to this scene, in the Conversation, and let me take you to this scene in the lives of others, when this guy, after the East Berlin has fallen, he meets this, senior guy who was constantly trying to snoop him. And he asks that, why was I not under surveillance? And then he says that you are always under surveillance. And he's like, no, I don't get you. He says, just go to your home and look behind your switchboard and you will see the wires. And he goes back to his home and he opens it up and he sees all those wires and mechanisms. And then he gets this realization, oh my God, all these years I have been watched. And then you are immediately reminded of that amazing last sequence from the Conversation with Gene Hackman. He tears down the walls, he tears down the floors of his house. Everything has been torn apart, and he's sitting in the corner. He's absolutely clueless, flabbergasted. His paranoia has gotten the better of him, and then in the end, he's playing this saxophone because he cannot think of any other thing to do but play
Mhm.
that saxophone in that state. So that's very uncanny, I think, the resemblance, if you compare these two films. And of course, then there are films like Blowout, which again, was Brian De Palma was a huge fan of Blow Up. Blow
Mhm.
Up is a Michelangelo Antonioni film, which actually inspired Francis Ford Coppola to make The Conversation. So that is about a photographer who captures a photograph in a park, and he feels that he has also spotted the murderer. This is a mystery. But then Michelangelo Antonioni's films are never about, getting to the. He's not Hitchcock, so his films are more, in a very abstract space. But it actually inspired Brian De Palma to make Blowout, and it also inspired Francis Ford Coppola to make The Conversation. And interestingly, both Blow Up, the Michelangelo Antonioni film, and The Conversation, they both ended up winning Palme d'Or at Cannes. So
Oh.
a great coincidence, but also the fact that one film has inspired the other, and which in turn has been inspiring films since then. There's The Lives of Others. There are so many other films about snooping. There are so many films about surveillance, but it's very difficult. Like I remember once Steven Spielberg said that, if you've seen a Buster Keaton film, then you will inevitably end up copying his chase sequences, because Buster Keaton's chase sequences have been the most influential. Nobody does chase sequences like him. So if you have seen a film of Buster Keaton wherein he's doing his famous chase sequences, and you end up making a film that has a chase sequence, inevitably you will end up copying Buster Keaton. So that's where William Friedkin was lucky, that when he made
The French
French
Connection.
Connection, he was not introduced to Buster Keaton. So that chase sequence is so original.
Interesting.
If you revisit it today, you will see that there's nothing like Buster Keaton in that. So Friedkin says that had he watched a Buster Keaton film before making the French Connection, then he would have also tried to copy. So that's very similar, in surveillance space. If you have seen films like Blowout, if you have seen films like, in particularly The Conversation, then you will end up, imitating or trying to emulate parts of it. So that paranoia, that sense of, fear, that is so omnipresent, in both these films. And in any film, that's about surveillance. There's this film called Enemy of the State, which is actually a tribute to Gene Hackman's character in The Conversation. So a lot of films which deals with the idea of state-sponsored surveillance, snooping, it has that sense of fear. Even a film like Syriana, there's this constant fear of this, you being watched by the satellites. Somebody is watching you, a body of lies. There's this fear of you're constantly being watched by somebody up there through satellite imagery or through something or the other. So this sense of paranoia, this sense of fear is always omnipresent.
Oh wow. Like I didn't knew about that. Like Enemy of the State, I think was directed by Tony Scott, right? The brother of Ridley Scott. Yeah, he made some great, interesting films as well. Like I didn't knew about that. But yeah, such great recommendations. So like I have to yet to watch. I'm yet to watch Syriana, and I'm yet
Syriana is
to.
a wonderful film. I feel, when you talk about these, these multiple arcs and, trying to, address different storylines, and they eventually merge one with the other, multi-layered
Like
narrative.
Love
This is, I
Actually
think,
kind of thing.
yeah, I think so. This is a very wonderful film. And I think in terms of surveillance, also in terms of this idea of fear, snooping, paranoia, I think it's a very important film and very well made film. And I think everybody should watch who has, a neck for this kind of cinema.
Oh wow! So yeah, surely I personally will definitely watch that film since it has George Clooney. I know like it certainly has George Clooney, and that's the reason like film actually won him the best supporting actor Oscar. So
And what
I
a
actually.
performance he has delivered, in that beard. He doesn't look like an American. He looks like an Iranian, if I remember correctly. That's what he plays. And wonderful performance. Hats off to George Clooney. And that was actually the first time I realized that George Clooney could act. Because before that, I had just watched the Ocean films and I thought, he's one of those, fops or, dandies who are well dressed and not much of an actor. But Syriana proved me wrong. And, hats off to George Clooney that he's one of those rare, well dressed, wonderful superstars, debonair, dashing stars who can also act well.
Mhm. But sir, coming back to this film, like, can you name any of the scenes which actually stood out completely stood out to you, like which was like you might say your favorite scene or in the entire like from the entire film, and actually why?
See, in fact, there's so many films, which are full of scenes, that you want to revisit and you want to rewatch. And I think The Lives of Others is no exception. There are so many scenes. Some of these scenes are really frightening, terrifying. Some of these scenes are very repulsive. Some of these scenes are so, powerful that as a viewer, it gets to you, it hits you. For example, I am reminded of that scene in that theater, the first time we are introduced to the actress and the writer. And when this guy, Ulrich Muhe, who plays the Stasi
That's so.
officer, he's watching them, through that, binocular.
Hmm.
And that actually sets it up beautifully, I cannot think of a better scene, a better introduction to what we are going to be watching for the rest of the, 2 hours or 2.5 hours or so. That is such a great introductory scene. And a scene before that is also, that wonderful scene in that classroom when he's telling the students okay, this is how you have to, grill them. This is how you need to break them. You also have to take sweat samples. And then when you are speaking the truth, then you often tend to rephrase your statements. But when you are lying, you are always
Stick with
saying the
that.
same thing over and over again. So he's giving you hints, he's giving you ideas. And when that student is like, don't you think that it is inhuman? Then he notes down his name, and
Hmm.
he puts the star or mark against his name in the, and that is just a hint that okay, this is where we are. This is the GDR. This is the DDR. Here, people are not excused. One mistake, and you are out of the system. As we saw with that, theater director, the legendary theater director, he fell out of favor with the officials, and he's been asked to retire. And then he says that, do you think that there should be some hope? Would he be back on stage? And the senior officer is like, yeah, you can hope. Hope stays with you even after you are dead. So he's basically telling you that he may remain hopeful, but it is just hope that he'll have. And that gives us a very good, introduction to what we can expect in the film. Then, as the film moves on, there are so many powerful scenes with Ulrich movie. His face, as you also touched upon, the expressions on his face, they're so telling, and he's never overacting. He's never doing anything more than it's is expected of him. And his face is is so expressive. Every time his facial expression changes, you can think and you can see what he's thinking. So your thinking is somewhat impacted by his idea, inner thought process, and then you slowly see him gradually changing into that person. And then one particular scene that is very close to my heart is when this writer tells the actress that while listening to the music, that this music is so beautiful. If somebody has actually listened to the music, I mean actually listened to the music, how
Hmm.
can that person be bad? So we are asking ourselves, is listening to good music alone something that can make a human being good? Like we all know that Hitler had a certain taste for art, but that doesn't make him any less evil.
Hmm.
Probably something that a lot of artists have also, a lot of intellectuals, a lot of scholars have also discussed and debated, that is good music or good taste in art. Look at Hannibal Lecter. He was
Hmm.
such an aficionado, but he was also a remorseless killer. So I think that's a very interesting way to put it, that can listening to good music or tasting good music, can that guarantee that you are a good human being? And then the most terrifying of them, that scene in the car wherein this minister guy, he makes the actress sit in that limousine and he literally rapes her. That is such a scary scene. I remember while I was watching the film at the India Habitat Center recently, that scene, it was terrifying. I could see, I could hear
People.
people getting very uneasy. I could, that was really, it really shook me deeply. And I think that is one of the most difficult scenes to have filmed in that film. Hats off to all the actors involved. But I think that's really, really difficult. And then that scene in the end, wherein he goes and sees this Stasi officer, and then he decides that, okay, I will not meet him, and then he writes this book, and then he sees, and this Ulrich Mue's character, he comes and buys this book, and he sees that it's dedicated to, and it's the code name. It's not his name, but even though now the writer knew his name, but he says, no, I'll just put in the code name. And then he picks up the book, and he says that, do you want, the guy, the store guy says that, do you want me to parcel it for you? He's like, no, it's for me. And then the freeze frame happens. And I think freeze frame is such a wonderful cinematic trope that goes back to the French New Wave days. I was reminded of 400 Blows, actually, how Truffaut uses that scene in that final, freeze frame. So this was a great tribute, I thought, from Florian Henkel, using the freeze frame to bring the film to a wonderful end.
Oh wow! I actually didn't knew about that. The freeze frame actually had such a
I don't
significance
know.
on.
I don't know. I haven't heard, Florian talking about it, but this is my own understanding that
Hmm.
probably it was something that he wanted to use, maybe sort of a tribute or something he thought was right for that scene. Could be aesthetic reason also, but I think it works really well.
Absolutely. Like
You see
the
that side view of Ulrich Mue's face, the expressive, it's like a map, his face. And, I think is the perfect way to end the film.
I actually was like I was pretty sad about like when I watched this film.
And you must know that, yeah, he passed away and this was one of his last roles, but what a great ending to his career. Of course, he did one or two films after that also, but I think this is really the consummation of his wonderful acting career, which started out on stage, and that too in GDR. So he was actually somebody who was also involved at one point in time in the construction of the wall. He was also a part of the patrolling, police at one point in time. And later on, when the wall was about to collapse, he also delivered that famous speech in 1989 in which he denounced the Soviet communist rule. So he was actually, his life was entwined to that wall. And, according to certain accounts, his wife, was also snooping, spying on him as a Stasi operative. So sort of a autobiographical, touch to that film. And of course, when Ulrich Muhe was asked that how did you prepare for the role, he simply said that I remember. So I think there cannot be more two powerful words than I remember. He was there, he saw it, and he just relived, in that wonderful performance that he gives. Though this time around, he was also, on the other side, trying to show you the things from the Stasi's point of view
The
also.
roles
But
were
at the end of
switched.
the day, and also, I must touch upon some criticism, that the film got. A lot of people said that Stasi was such a bad entity. It was such a bad outfit that there was nobody like Ulrich Mue's character. So how can you humanize, the Stasi? So that's when Florian Henkel said that there was also, Oscar Schindler. But then the other guy tells him that Oscar Schindler was for real, but this guy was not for real. That's what differentiates, that time in Nazi Germany to this time in, the East German, establishment. So I think that's a interesting criticism. But I thought that Henkel did a wonderful job of humanizing, because
But
I'm
still,
sure
we can
even when,
but like we can
yeah,
see in on screen that like his heart actually changes. Like he was evil at first, but like his heart actually changed when he heard the conversation of the couple, like of what he's doing is actually right, like what his beliefs on the German Democratic Republic are. And that's the main reason like his heart got converted to the right thing. And
I think it's interesting because all those around him, their hearts didn't change. His superiors, the guy minister, he was still as vile he always was. His superior also was as vile he used to be. But this particular guy, his heart changed. I think that's what cinema does. It opens up possibilities. I'm not sure whether a guy like this, existed, whether all Stasi people were, out and out evil. I was not there, so I cannot, speak for them. But I think this character really embodies, the spirit, of what he represented. He was a man whose soul was torn. He was completely, his loyalties were constantly conflicted. He starts off with this officer who wants to be very rigid and he wants to do his job, and slowly, because of this actress, whom he admired and he looked up to, he has this change of heart and he sees, the follies of the system that he represented.
Wow. Yeah, but actually, thank you so much, sir. Like, I'm sadly ending this conversation, and I know we can like speak like many hours on this, like in this great film. But sadly, we don't have much time over here. But thank you so much, Murtaza ji, for like coming to my podcast again, like discussing another Berlin-based film. So, it's been a real honor. I've been constantly texting you like, just please, can you come this month, can you come this month? Like finally you have like you came on this like in this month, so thank you so much. It's like been a
I
real
had
honor.
to come. You gave me a reason when you said Lives of Others. I couldn't say no because I only revisited it recently, and I think it's a film that's very close to my heart. And thank you so much for giving me this wonderful opportunity to share my thoughts on this film.
Yeah, the honor is mine, sir. So yeah, I'll see you in another video, hope so, very 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 soon. So
Hopefully, looking forward.
thank you so
Thank you
much,
so
and
much.
goodbye.